Okay, now we're going to move into Chapter 2. Chapter 2 deals with all sorts of general regulations as well. It's going to start off with Article 200, use and identification of grounded conductors. Article 210, branch circuits. Article 215, feeders. 220 is branch circuit feeder and service load calculations. Article 225 is going to be outside branch circuits and feeders. Article 230 is going to be services. 240 is overcurrent protection. 242 is a new article here for the 2020, over voltage. What they did is they took all the information out of Article 285 and 280 as surge protected devices and surge arresters, combined those together and stuck that into an article which is 242 for over voltage protection. And then we also have grounding and bonding. One of the things about overcurrent and grounding and bonding is that's found basically all over the code book. It's not just found in those articles 240 and 250, it's all over the code book. So our default when we take a look at overcurrent and grounding and bonding is going to be to take a look at the piece of equipment that we're protecting, not necessarily just jump into 240 or 250, all right? And so that's going to be the posture that we're going to take when we get to those articles. But first off, let's jump into Article 200, use and identification of grounded conductors. And so we're going to start off here in 200.6, means of identifying grounded conductors. And we're going to go to letter A, sizes 6 gauge or smaller. An insulated grounded conductor of 6 gauge or smaller shall be identified by one of the following means. It can have a white outer finish. Number 2, a gray outer finish. And then number 3, it can have 3 continuous white or gray stripes along the conductor's entire length other than green insulation. And then letter B down below there, sizes 4 gauge or larger, and can use that white outer finish, a gray outer finish, 3 continuous white or gray stripes along the conductor's entire length other than green insulation. But number 4, and this is the important part for the test question, at the time of installation, a distinct white or gray marking at its terminations. This marking shall encircle the conductor or insulation. So the question on the exam is, what size conductors can be just identified at the terminations? And that would be sizes 4 gauge or larger. Moving on here, page 60, we're going to get into Article 210. Article 210 is branch circuits. We're going to take a look at Part 1, general provisions, and then 210.4, we've got multi-wire branch circuits. Multi-wire branch circuits. Letter A, down below there, says branch circuits recognized by this article shall be permitted as multi-wire branch circuits. A multi-wire circuit shall be permitted to be considered as multiple circuits. All conductors of a multi-wire branch circuit shall originate from the same panel board or similar distribution equipment. So question on the exam says, where do those conductors need to originate? And that's from the same panel board or similar distribution equipment. Moving on here, 210.5, we've got identification for branch circuits. We're going to skip letter A and letter B. We're going to go down to letter C. That's probably going to take us on to the next page here. Identification of ungrounded conductors. And again, these are ungrounded conductors in the branch circuit. And number 2, these are branch circuits applied from direct current systems. So these are DC systems. And letter A, positive polarity. And this is for conductors that are sizes 6 gauge or smaller, where the positive polarity of a DC system does not serve as the connection point of the grounded conductor. Each positive ungrounded conductor shall be identified by one of the following means: a continuous red outer finish, a continuous red stripe, imprinted plus or the word positive sign, or POS also is okay. And then number 4, approved permanent marking. So again, for DC systems, they need to be red in color or have positive printed on them. Moving on to number 2 down below there, This is going to be for letter B, negative polarity. So we looked at letter A, positive polarity, being red. Now we're going to take a look at negative. So for DC systems, that's going to have to be black. So number 1 says a continuous black outer finish, a continuous black stripe, or imprinted minus sign on there, or the word negative, or NEG, or any approved permanent marking. So anything that's approved we can do. So when we take a look at a test question, you have 4 different choices, and one of them says approved. That's always going to be the right answer. Okay, so if they ask about an approved permanent marking, that is a correct way to identify the conductor because it's been approved. 210.6, we've got branch circuit voltage limitations. We're going to skip down to letter A down below there, occupancy limitation. It says in dwelling units and guest rooms or guest suites of hotels or motels or similar occupancies, the voltage shall not exceed 120 volts nominal between conductors that supply terminals of the following, and that's going to be cord and plug connected loads 1440 volt amps nominal or less. And then it says or less than a quarter horsepower. But the question on the exam says I've got a cord and plug connected load of 1440 volt amps in a hotel or motel. What's our maximum voltage that we can use to supply that cord and plug connected load? And that's going to be 120 volts. Moving on down below there, we've got letter D, 600 volts between conductors. And we're going to jump down underneath that. It says circuits exceeding 277 volts nominal to ground and not exceeding 600 volts nominal between conductors shall be permitted to supply the following. And number 1 down below there says the auxiliary equipment of electric discharge lamps mounted in permanently installed luminaires where the luminaires are mounted in accordance with the following. Not less than 22 feet on poles or similar structures for the illumination of outdoor areas such as highways, roads, bridges, athletic fields, or parking lots. And then letter B, a height of 18 feet on other structures such as tunnels. So if I've got road lighting or parking lot lighting that exceeds 277 volts, maximum voltage that I can have on that is 600 volts. And then the minimum height of that at that voltage is going to be 22 feet. Now in a tunnel, that minimum height is going to be 18 feet. Moving on here, we got 210.8, ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel, and letter A for dwelling units. So all these locations, 1, 2, 3, 4, all those locations require GFCI in a dwelling unit. So number 1, bathrooms, garages, number 2, outdoors, crawl spaces, basements, those all require GFCI. But the question on the exam when it comes to a basement is an exception that they have on there, which says that if that receptacle is supplying only a permanently installed fire alarm or burglar alarm system, it's not required to have GFCI. See, in this circumstance, what would happen is if I had interruption of the power, now all of a sudden I've created a hazard. So they're saying even if it's in a basement, but it's only supplying a burglar alarm or fire alarm, it is not now required to have GFCI. And then number 7, sinks. Anything within 6 feet of the top inside edge of the bowl of the sink needs to have GFCI. So those are 2 different questions that we're seeing. One having to do with a fire alarm in a basement, and then the other, anything within 6 feet of a sink needs to have the GFCI. Moving on from there, we've got 210.11. This should be on page 63. 210.11, branch circuits required. And so letter A is number of branch circuits. We're going to skip that and go down to letter B, load evenly proportioned among branch circuits. Where the load is calculated on the basis of volt amps per square foot, the wiring system up to and including the branch circuit panel boards shall be provided to serve not less than the calculated load. This load shall be evenly proportioned among multiple multi-outlet branch circuits within the panel board. So we want to evenly distribute that load within the panel board. Letter C, dwelling units. So these are required branch circuits in a dwelling unit. Number one, the small appliance branch circuit. In addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, 2 or more 20 amp small appliance branch circuits shall be provided for all receptacle outlets specified by 210.52b. And so 210.52b requires that we have a minimum in each dwelling unit of 2 branch circuits. 210.52c1 requires 2 branch circuits as a minimum. A little bit later on in Article 220, we'll assign a value of those of 1,500 volt amps of each. And then number 2, laundry branch circuit. In addition to the number of branch circuits required by other parts of this section, at least one 20 amp branch circuit shall be provided to supply the laundry receptacle outlets required by 210.52f. This circuit shall have no other outlets. So as a minimum, we're going to have 2 small appliance branch circuits and 1 laundry branch circuit when we're trying to calculate the minimum load that we're going to have for a dwelling unit. 210.12, arc fault circuit interrupter. I can't say that properly here. Let's try that again. Arc fault circuit interrupter protection. And letter A for dwelling units. We're going to go down below number 1, number 2. We're going to jump down to number 3, dwelling units. And we're going to find little letter B. The maximum length of branch circuit wiring from the branch circuit overcurrent device to the first outlet shall not exceed 50 feet for 14 gauge conductors and 70 feet for 12 gauge conductors. So if I've got an arc fault circuit interrupter protection on my branch circuit, then that maximum length to that first outlet is going to be 50 feet if I'm using 14 gauge wire, and then 70 feet if I'm using 12 gauge wire. We're going to go down below to number 6. So before we were looking at number 3, we're going to jump down to number 6. It says where a listed metal or non-metallic conduit or tubing or type MC cable is encased in not less than 2 inches of concrete for the portion of the branch circuit between the branch circuit overcurrent device and the first outlet. So really, the rest of that stuff doesn't matter. They're going to ask us on the exam how much concrete we need to have that encased in, and that's going to be 2 inches. Okay, now we're going to jump into part 2, which is branch circuit ratings. And under 210.18, we've got rating. Okay, so let me just read before we get to the highlight on the exception what the rule is here. So it says, branch circuits recognized by this article shall be rated in accordance with the maximum permitted ampere rating or setting of the overcurrent device. The rating for other than individual branch circuits shall be 15, 20, 30, and 50 amps. Where the conductors of higher ampacity are used for any reason, the ampere rating or setting of the specified overcurrent device shall determine the circuit rating. Now, an exception to that, it says multi-outlet branch circuits greater than 50 amps shall be permitted to supply, real important, non-lighting outlet loads on industrial premises where conditions of maintenance or supervision ensure that only qualified persons service the equipment. So if I have only qualified persons that are servicing the equipment, then what it says is I can have a higher branch circuit rating than 50 amps, okay? As long as I'm only supplying non-lighting outlet loads for industrial purposes. So in that circumstance, we can get over 50 amps on the branch circuit. Okay, 210.19, this is still under branch circuit ratings. We've got conductors, minimum ampacity and size. And letter A, we got branch circuits not more than 600 volts. And then we have an informational note in here. And it's really kind of confusing when you take a look at the informational note. It's informational note number 3. It says conductors for branch circuits as defined in Article 100, size to prevent a voltage drop exceeding 3% at the farthest outlet of power and lighting loads, or combinations of such loads where the maximum total voltage drop on feeders and branch circuits to the farthest outlet does not exceed 5% provide reasonable efficiency of operation. So basically what they're trying to say here is this. So again, it's worded horribly, but this is what they're trying to say. Okay, on a feeder, 3% maximum recommended voltage drop. On a branch circuit, 3% maximum is the recommended voltage drop. Most commonly on the exam, what they're going to ask for is the combined total voltage drop, because we all use that 3% rule in the field. But the combined total voltage drop of 5% is the thing that they're looking for on the exam. All right, we're going to move on to 210.19, conductors, minimum ampacity and size. And this is, again, branch circuits not more than 600 volts, same section that we were in, right? But it says, letter A down below there under number 1, general. It says, where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous and non-continuous loads, the minimum branch circuit conductor size shall have an ampacity of not less than the non-continuous load plus 125% of the continuous load. And so let's take a look here up on the board. So basically the rule says that continuous load is going to be done at 125%. So if I have 16 amps of continuous load, we're going to take our 16 amps times 125%, that'll give us 20 amps, right? And so the size of our conductors need to be able to handle 20 amps in this circumstance. And these are conductors specifically on a branch circuit, okay? And then if we have 10 amps of non-continuous load, then that's going to be done at 100%, right? And so 100% of 10 amps is 10 amps, okay? So the conductors for that 10 amps of non-continuous load is going to be done at 100%. And so that conductor needs to be able to handle 10 amps, all right? Now, if I had a feeder that's supplying 16 amps of continuous load plus 10 amps of non-continuous load, what I'd do is my 16 amps at 125%, give me 20 amps, and do 10 amps at 100%, 10 amps. I add those two together. Now my feeders need to be able to handle 30 amps. And so any continuous load is done at 125%. Any non-continuous load is done at 100%, okay? And that is a rule specifically for this application. Here's the problem. We like to learn a rule and apply it everywhere. And that really becomes a problem when we're taking the exams, because this is the rule for sizing conductors for a branch circuit. If I want to size conductors in a certain circumstance that's different than this, then I'm going to need to go to that. I kind of misspoke earlier. I said a feeder, right? I'd really need to see what the rules are for the feeder, okay? By the way, the rules are the same. Sometimes the rules are the same. Sometimes the rules are different. Sometimes it's 125%. Sometimes it's 100%. Sometimes it's 140%. Sometimes it's 115%. We just need to go to see what that component is of the electrical system and go find what the rules are. When we start applying rules as a blanket rule, that's when we get in trouble on the exam. So don't do that. What you want to do is you want to learn the rule from that section and apply it only in that circumstance, okay? And that circumstance in this instance is for us to size our conductors on the branch circuit. By the way, if you ever get lost in the code, if you look up at the top of the page in your code book, it'll always tell you what section you're in. So this is going to be conductor sizing for our branch circuits, a 210, right? So anytime we're in Article 210, we're talking about branch circuits. So when it just says conductors, that means conductors for a 210, which is branch circuits. All right, now down below there, we've got number 3, household ranges and cooking appliances. That last sentence in that paragraph says, for ranges of 8 3/4 kilowatts or more rating, the minimum branch circuit rating shall be 40 amps. Okay, we know that. We run a dedicated 40 amp branch circuit for the range all the time, right? But the question on the exam more commonly has to do with the exception. And the exception says conductors tapped from a branch circuit not exceeding 50 amps Supplying electric ranges, wall-mounted electric ovens, and counter-mounted electric cooking units shall have an ampacity of not less than 20 amps and shall be sufficient for the load to be served. So if I'm tapping off of a 50, my minimum branch circuit rating for a range is going to be 20 as long as it's sufficient for the load to be served. All right, now 210.20, this is overcurrent protection. Overcurrent protection on what? A 210. And what is a 210? That is going to be our branch circuit. And letter A, continuous and non-continuous load. Where a branch circuit supplies continuous loads or any combination of continuous and non-continuous loads, the rating of the overcurrent device shall not be less than the non-continuous load plus 125% of the continuous load. Okay, so here we've got some continuous load here, 4 amps, 4 amps, 4 amps, and 4 amps. Okay, so that's 16 amps of continuous load times 125%. That'd give us 20 amps of continuous load here. So we need our 20 amp branch circuit overcurrent device on that branch circuit. All right. Now we're going to find this table. This table's on page 66, and this is table 210.21b2. And this is our maximum cord and plug connected load to receptacle. Now, cord and plug connected load is considered always to be continuous duty. So this is really built the same. So on a 15 or 20 amp circuit rating with a 15 amp receptacle rating, they're only going to allow us basically the inverse of that 125%, which is 80% on that. So if I took my 15 amps times 80%, that would be 12 amps, okay? Same thing here, right? I've got a circuit rating of 20 amps, I got a receptacle rating of 20 amps, then I can take 80% of that, which is 16 amps. Again, that's just the mathematical inverse of that. So 125% times 125%, if I divide it by 125%, that's the same as 80% mathematically. So just kind of a weird little nuance there. I also have another table on here. This is table 210.21b3, and this is receptacle ratings for various size circuits. And so there's a question on the exam, says on a 20 amp branch circuit, what's the minimum receptacle rating that's allowed on there? And the answer would be 15 amps. Now we do that all the time. We install a 15 amp receptacle on a 20 amp branch circuit. Okay, it is perfectly acceptable to do that, and the code allows for that. Okay, now we're going to jump into 210.50. 210.50 is receptacle outlets, but you'll notice we transitioned into part 3, which is required outlets. So these are not just outlets, these are the ones that are required on a branch circuit. We're going to skip down to letter C. Letter C, appliance receptacle outlets. Appliance receptacle outlets installed in a dwelling unit for specific appliances, such as laundry equipment, shall be installed within 6 feet of the intended location of the appliance. So we want to make sure that we don't have to run a big extension cord or anything like that to this appliance, right? So we need to locate those receptacles within 6 feet of the intended location of that appliance. All right, now 210.52 is dwelling unit receptacle outlets. These are areas where we have required outlets and the required number of outlets that we have in a dwelling unit, okay? So the context here is receptacle outlets in a 210, which is branch circuits, but specifically those receptacle outlets in 210.52 are for dwelling units. So this doesn't apply to this commercial building that I'm filming in right now, right? It applies to my house. And so it says, this section provides requirements for 125 volt, 15 and 20 amp receptacle outlets. The receptacles required by this section shall be in addition to any receptacle that is as follows. Number 1, part of a luminaire or appliance, right? You can have a receptacle as part of a luminaire or appliance, right? But it doesn't count as one of the required ones. You can have one controlled by a wall switch, right? But it doesn't count as one of the required ones. You can locate one within a cabinet or cupboard, but again, that doesn't count And then you can also locate one more than 5.5 feet above the floor, but again, that's not going to be one that counts. All right? So in order for it to count, it needs to be 5.5 feet above the floor as a maximum. And that's your test question that you're looking at. Also, general provisions, wall spacing, receptacles, wall spacing in a dwelling unit. Number 1, spacing, it says receptacles shall be installed such that no point measured horizontally along the floor line of any wall space is more than 6 feet from a receptacle outlet. So that doesn't mean I need to have them every 6 feet, right? It says I can never be any more than 6 feet from one. So if I've got 12-foot spacing here, right, and I stand right in the middle of those two, then I'm no more than 6 feet from a receptacle in either direction. So our maximum spacing is 12 feet. So why don't they just say that? Give me one every 12 feet. Well, what if I had a smaller room, like a 10 by 10 bedroom or something like that? Do I need any? Right? So they use that saying, let's start in the corner, let's come over 6 feet, right? We'll put a receptacle there. And then if I have anything more than 6 feet left over, let's stick another one in there. Okay, so you can never be more than 6 feet from one. All right, down below there we've got number 2, wall space. As used in this section, a wall space shall include the following: any space that's 2 feet or more in width. So what's considered a wall? Any space that's 2 feet or more in width. And then number 3, floor receptacles. Floor receptacles. Receptacle outlets in or on floors shall not be counted as part of the required number of receptacle outlets unless located within 18 inches of the wall. So in order for it to count, it needs to be within 18 inches of the wall if it's a floor receptacle. Letter B, small appliances. And number 3, kitchen receptacle requirements. And it says receptacles installed in a kitchen to serve countertop surfaces shall be supplied by not fewer than 2 small appliance branch circuits, either or both of which shall also be permitted to supply receptacle outlets in the same kitchen and in other rooms specified by 210.52b1. So moving on from there, we're going to go down to letter H, hallways. In dwelling units, hallways of 10 feet or more in length shall have at least 1 receptacle outlet. So it's not saying I need one for every 10 feet. It says if it's 10 feet or more, I need to have 1 receptacle outlet. So if I've got a 100-foot long hallway in my house, I'm required to have 1 receptacle outlet. Again, remember, these are the minimum standards. These are not a good standard. This is the minimum, right? And so this is how somebody becomes the low bidder, right? So here I have a test question here that we might see on the exam, right? It says, how many receptacle outlets are required in an unfinished basement of a single family dwelling? So one of the things we want to take a look at is we want to see, is this even going to be in this book? Now, about 80 to 90% of your test is going to be out of this book, so chances are it's going to come out of this book. But there's wording that would indicate whether or not this would be something that I could find in this book. What we're looking for is what we call mandatory language. Mandatory language are things like must, shall, minimum, maximum, something that shakes its finger at you and says, you got to do this way, right? You don't have a choice. This is the minimum that you can ever do. This is the maximum that you can ever do. This is what you must do. This is what you shall do, right? And so do I have any of that wording in here? Let's see. It says required, okay? So when we take a look at this, most likely I'm going to be able to find the answer to this in this book. Now, when I'm taking a look at a test question, I always want to make sure, number 1, am I really sure that I know what that question is asking? I always want to reread the question, all right? So in this circumstance, what we're taking a look at was how many receptacle outlets are required. So they're asking me how many receptacle outlets, right? in this application. Number 2, does that question have any mandatory language like must, shall, minimum, maximum? Yes, sure enough, that has that type of language in it. It's shaking its finger at you and saying this is what's required, right? And then number 3 on there, it says what key words can I pull out of that question to help find it in the index? So the index on this book is very comprehensive. It goes on for 70 pages. So it's got a lot of detail in it. So I want to take a look at my test question and see what key word would I use to pull out the information in the index and find that in there. Well, there's a couple of different things that I could look at. I could look at receptacles. I could look at outlets, right? I could look at basements. I could look at single-family dwellings. Here's the problem with single-family dwellings. I just feel like that's too broad, right? By the way, I could find it if I looked at it based off of single-family dwellings, but that's a very broad topic. So I want to narrow it down to something more specific. Something like basements is more specific than single-family dwellings, right? Or receptacle outlets in that basement are going to be even more specific, right? And so we're going to look at maybe receptacles or outlets in the index. That's going to get as specific as I think I can. So normally I want to get as specific as possible, right? Hit it right on the bullseye. So let's take a look. Let's look at outlets, okay? Because that comes up first in my index alphabetically before receptacles. So let's take a look at that first. So turn to the back of your book, find the index, right? And we're going to go through the index. We're going to find some information in there. Now, the index is a little bit confusing in that what it does is it lists everything alphabetically, but only alphabetically by those bold headings, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the bold headings. We're going to find the O's. We're going to find outlets. And so if we find that, it's going to be on page 882. Now, you have light type stuff that's indented as well. What does that mean? Well, under outlets, you've got appliance, right? And it's indented and it's in lighter type. And so what that means is that's an appliance outlet. And then it has communications outlets or discontinued outlets. So that's all talking about outlets. So that's the context of what we're seeing there in that index. And then you'll notice for like appliance outlets, it says 210.52 or 210.50C. Okay? Now that's not page 210. That's a code reference, and that's better than a page number. Because a code reference will get you just on the page. You got to read the whole page. A code reference 210.50C gets you to the right spot on the page, right? So we're going to go into Article 210. We're going to find 210.50, and we're going to find 210.50C, right? So in this case, we're going to go to outlets, and then we're going to go down in the light type here, and we're going to find receptacle outlets. So 210.50 it says, right? But it also has further indented. You want to get more specific? Let's talk about definition of outlets. Let's talk about dwellings where required. That's really what we need, right? And it tells us to go to 210.52. All right? Before we get there, let's find outlet or receptacles. And so if we go into the R's, now we're going to find receptacles. It says cord connectors and attachment plugs. Receptacles, cord connectors, and attachment plugs. And then if we go under the light indented, we have outlets. These are receptacle outlets, and then dwellings where required. And it still tells us to go to 210.52. So what we want to do is go to 210.52, which is where we were at to begin with. All right? So we go to 210.52. We're back on page 68. All right? And what we're going to do is we're going to find 210.52 dwelling unit receptacle outlets, and then we're going to scan the headings to see if we can find anything that has to do with basements. All right? And so I go to letter A, general provisions. That's probably not going to tell me what I need. So the idea here is you don't read what you don't need. I don't need to know anything about general provisions. I want to get real specific with basements. So I'm going to skip that section. I go to letter B, small appliances. Nope, that's not what I need. I go to letter C, countertops and work surfaces. That's not what I need, right? I find letter D, bathrooms. That's not what I'm looking for. Letter E, outdoor outlets. Nope. Letter F, laundry areas. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Letter G, basements, garages, and accessory buildings. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and start reading. So the idea here is you're scanning the headings to see if we can find something that has to do with basements. Now let's say I got to the end of that. I went through A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. I didn't find anything. Okay, well now I can go back and maybe read some of the stuff and see if I can find some detail on basements in like section A or whatever. But the main thing that we want to do is we want to scan this stuff and find this stuff quickly. The quicker that we can find it, the quicker we can get on to that next question and get another point in our pocket, right? We need to get 70% or 75% depending on whether I'm taking the journeyman or the contractor test on there. So we want to get to that next right answer, right? So we scanned A, we scanned B, we scanned C. None of that worked, right? We go to D, that didn't work. Letter E didn't work. And so we go to letter F, that didn't work. And then letter G, okay, now to whoa, 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 basements, garages, and accessory buildings. Now we're going to jump in and start reading. And so we go to letter G, basements, garages, and accessory building. And it says for 1 and 2 family dwellings and multifamily dwellings, at least one receptacle outlet shall be installed in the area specified in 210.52 G1 through G3. And so it says I need at least one in number 1, a garage. Number 2, an accessory building. I don't need to read that stuff, right? Because really what I need is number 3, basements. It says in each separate unfinished portion of a basement. So if I'm finding this, right, and I say in a basement, I'm going to need 1, right? So question originally, if you recall, that was how many receptacle outlets are required in an unfinished basement of a single family dwelling? We reread the question. We made sure that we knew what it was talking about, right? We found that it did, in fact, have mandatory language in it. And then we looked up key words. Now, we could have looked up basements. We could have looked up receptacles. We could have looked up outlets. By the way, if I looked up basements, it would have said receptacles in, and it would have taken me to 210.52G, because that's very specific, right? And so I could have found that by looking up single-family dwellings. I could have found that by looking up receptacles, could have looked up outlets or basements. All those methods could get us to exactly where we need to go. The index is your best friend anytime you're taking this NASCLA exam or any other state exam, okay? It's going to be the best way to get to the information that you need, all right? And so once we found out that it's got that mandatory language, we're going to find it here in this book, right? And again, what we did is we went into the index, we looked up outlets, we found receptacle outlets, and it said dwellings where required. It took us to 210.52, right? And then we started scanning those headings. Letter A, general, nope. Letter B, small appliance, nope. Letter C, countertops, nope. Letter D, bathrooms. Letter E. So we don't read what we don't need. What we needed was letter G. We read that and found out that I need 1 receptacle outlet in an unfinished basement. That's required in a dwelling unit. All right, so that's how you use the index to find questions. Now we're going to have some practice questions as a part of this course where you're going to practice looking stuff up that's not necessarily on the test, right? But it's a good tool to practice that so that you're well prepared to take this exam.